What's good, everybody? I'm actually still here hanging out with Tim. I believe I'll be on today's episode as well, but I'm just kind of hanging out. And there were some things that we discussed in that last show, which I thought would be a good segue into a straight video of me kind of discussing some of these issues. Now, for those of you that have not watched, you can, of course, go to Timcast IRL and you can go watch that. But for those of you that did, towards the latter half of that discussion, just as an example, you could see that the conversation got to change in terms of its attitude, where was a split between, let's say, myself and Luke being hardcore anarchists, and then you had Ian and Tim, and they had their positions as well. So a lot of folks mistook that. I'm not saying the majority of you guys did or anything. I'm just saying we saw that some of you guys mistook that as, tempers flaring, people are losing their cool, and that type of thing. And those of you that watch my material, that was not aside from anything that I've handled in terms of discussions, live debates, and what have you. But it shows the disconnect culturally where people just can't process this concept that there are guys that are passionate about what it is that they discuss. Voices may start to raise, and that person isn't like out of their element, right? Or losing their mind or losing their cool. Again, you watch my channel, you know that's nothing that I haven't already done, especially when it comes to even having to raise your actual voice to get your point across among, there's no debate moderator. It's something that has to be done. And culturally, that's just a thing, right? But for those of people that are not used to that, and that's not how they particularly process information, they'll mistake that as something else. And they can't even conceive this sort of idea that someone else would be able to more so respond to that, or rather dissect what's actually taking place. That goes right into the point of the actual discussion that we were having, in that there is no one answer, one way type of thing that exists when it comes to handling some sort of problem. And this is why centralization is bad. This is why we say that it's bad. This is why when you talk about government and how the state works, let's say in America's case, we would much rather have the markets be left up to resolve those particular issues. Now, some people just, they want what they want, and this is a way to word it. And I may even title the video something along these lines. People want centralized answers when they ask you for how something would, let's say, work in a more decentralized society. Look, an analogy that I always use is like shoes, right? If the government monopolized shoes, they determined how, what size shoe you had to wear, when you can get it. If you were to be a person that was like a vendor, how much you had to sell it for. If the government did that, all it would take is one generation for people to be completely absent of the idea that, well, this could be privatized, or rather this could be decentralized, and we don't need one person or one entity that has this monopoly on violence to control all of it. It would only take one generation to do that. And it sounds preposterous, I know now. It even sounds like a crazy thing to even assume, or it's like this false equivalency. And no, it's not. The state right now, like, for example, with something like roads that a lot of you guys talk about, they control that. And they have put up this ideal in which, okay, we control this. We decide if you are going to build a road, how it must be built. If you can build it, or set all of these rules, it has to go through us. And then you think that, oh, well, they make it to where everybody is free to travel. We don't have to worry about all of this sort of instance. So when you say, okay, the state should not control any of that, the first thing that pops in some people's minds is that, well, how would it work? And what they expect you to come up with is a more centralized answer as to how exactly it's supposed to work. But that's completely, and I think this is what I want people to understand that don't really understand libertarianism or liberty in general. What it is that we're advocating is the exact opposite of that. I know that I don't possess, possibly, the information to make a decision on behalf of millions upon millions of people. There are a lot of arrogant people in Washington that think they can do that. A lot of arrogant people that work for the state, work for the government, that think that that's something that they exist in their capacity. So you can have someone elected or unelected bureaucrat making decisions on behalf of people, saying that this is the way that it must be done. This is the way it is or needs to be for it to be most efficient. So a lot of folks, when it comes to libertarians, like having these theories, which is all they can actually be, anyway, is a theory, because right now we don't live in a, let's say, libertarian society. They expect, and this is your confusion, is that you're expecting more so a centralized answer for decentralization, which doesn't make sense. It's about the fact that we don't possess that capacity, and we know enough to know that we don't know. I have ideas. I've discussed this on this channel about, insurance and these sort of concepts. You're going to watch my previous roads videos if that's something that you want to do. Talked about Walter Block and his long write-up of these different sort of ideas, how much you spend right now. And this fear that it just cannot be done is more so in that the state seems to have made it clean cut for you, that you don't have to worry about. And because that is then removed, that monopoly is then removed, you don't know, and it's unfamiliar, and there's a lot of uncertainty there. And I totally understand that, which is why I think it's important to have those conversations. But to expect and demand to some, and this is what a lot of folks do with libertarians, is that, okay, I'm going to find this what if, I'm going to find this hypothetical scenario. As if and I got you. So never mind how it got there. One person is here, like the analogy that we were using, somehow owns every single road that exists in this geographical area. And because they don't like this person, they will bar them from it. Never mind, the state already does that effectively with banning of licensing, or revoking of licenses and driving and warrants and stuff like that. So that already happens. Anyway, but the idea that, we accept, like with this jacket or something that I have here, the people are able to freely exchange. We don't think that the government should run that. When it comes to something like transportation, the thing is that we don't make an exception for that. So I understand that a lot of you guys want it all in a bow because you're curious, and it's good to be curious. But you have to understand that even in my theory, I can be completely wrong. And a lot of you would accept that in some of the things that already exist in the market. You wouldn't accept that there has to be this one way to do things. You wouldn't. And I agree with you. Like, you shouldn't accept that as a thing, because it doesn't have to be that way. But they have conditioned everybody with a lot of things that they control, not just with transportation or something like that, but other things, among other things. They control all of this, and therefore, if they didn't, you would go without. And my preference has always been that I would much rather that be left to the marketplace as opposed to a centralized government. Because when you make an argument against that, well, this can't exist because there needs to be this institution that stops this, and this from happening. People talk about monopolies. We talked about it last show. There hasn't been a monopoly that has ever existed. Doesn't matter if it was Rockefeller, Standard Oil, Rockefeller, and him bribing legislators and politicians. Doesn't matter if it was with the Bell monopoly, essentially doing similar things where they were able to not necessarily just price out their competition. That more so was like basically making it illegal for people to be able to produce in a particular geographical area. We see a lot of that still exists to this day here with some of these companies. All of those things are obviously I'm particularly against. I think that there's a better way to do that, but centralization and every argument that you make for why it has to be centralized is essentially can be turned right back on you. In the fact that when you look at the greatest human atrocities, and this is what the point that it was being drove home yesterday, the great human atrocities, and I'm not talking about simply Hitler, right? Even the more complex ones where, not necessarily complex, but where it wasn't just a direct killing of your people, where it's like the USSR or something like that, and the famines and things that happen when you get the government in control of essentially everything, and how this must be priced, if it is to be priced at all. That's how you get bread lines, and that's how you get shortages, overages, because again, they can't possibly predict how that market, how that those groups of individuals would come up with a particular solution. So what they're doing is forcing one, right? But when you look at the great human atrocities in examples like that, they have been done to a much greater degree than what they've ever been done privately. And then to the examples that a lot of people point to, like the Somalias of the world, well, isn't that what you know? Somalia was a failed socialist state. But with the curiosity and with that sort of, okay, I'm trying to get to the logical conclusion because I want a clean, tied up in a nice, pretty little bow way of understanding how exactly something could work, as if four guys sitting in a room could possibly dictate what the solution would be. Now that comes with this sheer amount of arrogance, more so. But you are basically making every argument that you make to why it has to be centralized, or why rather you make an argument against the decentralization because of the uncertainty. You're making an argument against the case for centralization as well, because what a private institution can do, or private individuals could possibly do, is far greater than what it would be in the event that it is completely monopolized by way of that existing state, which is why you're talking in the last century, 250 million people being in some way, shape, form, or capacity killed by their own government. There is no equivalent to what private equivalent to what Zedong did, or what Pol Pot did, or what the Hitlers of the world, or what happened in the USSR. There's no private equivalent. Have people done bad things that didn't work for the government? Absolutely. And this is why this whole idea of utopianism, or that libertarians pretend that that's what it is that they advocate, is simply not true. It's not. Libertarians understand, anyone that was honest, that we don't advocate for perfection. We don't. There will be, inevitably, I'd argue, as long as you're dealing with human beings. This is why it's funny that people say, well, you don't account for human nature. That's exactly what it is that we do. We don't, we of course understand that there are bad people in this world. What we're saying is that we would much rather, for a lot of those instances. Now, what scale of the libertarian is going to determine how much of that. You got minarchists who believe that there should be a state that's small but does the things like contractual enforcement and national security and stuff like that. And then you have the more anarchist types. But regardless, what the actual libertarian in a more modern sense, they just want those to be left more so up to a private individuals, more so having that incentive to be cooperative with each other and also compete. So you can't look at life or the world through the lens of what exists now. So, oh, well, what about this rich person that got rich off of government contract? You can't look at that. This is why I think it's more important. If you're going to come up with some analogy, we need to discuss how it got there. Right? If you're going to end up, oh, well, this person owns all the roads, or this person owns all the food, or this person owns all, we have to discuss how on earth was that allowed to happen. And when that has happened, where there was in some industry an actual monopoly, and monopoly does not mean a big business. Monopoly does not mean a successful business. A monopoly, it means that legally, which is why it actually is predicated on the state's existence, legally means that another competitor can't produce. That's what an actual monopoly is, that they actually cannot, they will have aggression essentially upon them in the event that they try to create an alternative to what it is that you do. This is why we would say that implies stateism is one of the greatest myths, is that, well, yeah, you got this whole state thing, and it's supposed to protect us and all of these. And if it didn't, then Jeff Bezos would own virtually everything. Never mind, again, how we got his funds. But let's discuss that. So when we talk about, well, all of the what ifs, you also would have to ask, what if it didn't happen that way? Why does that have to be what it is that you that's the conclusion that you want to reach? It's because it is not as pretty to say, for me to say, okay, well, I have an idea, but it may not work that way. That can be said for virtually everything in this room that I'm looking at. The computer, the lights. I have absolutely no idea how to build any of this stuff. I bought it. I purchased. Well, Tim, this is his house. I have some of these same. I think these are it's GVM. I have newer lights, but I have similar lights here, and they all are. I have no idea how to make them, but I don't think Tim does either, and he's purchased them, and they are in the studio here. And we accept that as something that needs to exist, and people need to be competitive. It's a great thing. So I guess the grand old question is, would I rather this institution monopolize entire big geographical areas and have control of that, and have to they may be able to do something versus good versus bad, or would I just rather that be left up to the marketplace when it comes to even things and concepts like law, better so left to the market, like I would be with clothing or food. Of course, I'm going to take the latter, because it's easier for me to fight that as opposed it is to me, let's say, fighting the federal government. Like I say, it's easier for me to fight Denton County as opposed to the state of Texas. It's easier for me to fight the state of Texas as opposed to fighting the federal government. It's easier to fight the federal government as opposed maybe to United Nations or something like that, or NATO, or whatever. That's more so what it is. So get out of the mind that it needs to be pretty and needs to be explained, because no matter who it is, the smartest people in the world, a lot of them work for government. And this is why a lot of what they advocate turns into absolute disasters, because you act like I or folks like myself don't account for human action. You don't account for human action because you think that you can make a better decision than what people freely bouncing the ideas off of each other are able to come up with. So I know it's not pretty and in a bowl like, well, this is exactly how it's going to happen. And that's effectively what the state said. This is exactly what's going to happen. And then we see right now all of these people fighting amongst each other, which is getting more and more intense as we enter into January and Biden's presidency. Y'all can't agree on nothing. We recognize that the state is doing very bad things. I've documented over the course of this year something that is completely unheard of, where they have essentially locked people down and derailed their businesses. Third of businesses in certain areas and the restaurants that are getting completely shut down. There's institutions that are powerful enough to do just that. And to me, that is a problem. So why I want this decentralization, because it gets power closer to the individuals. And ultimately, we would want that power as close as we can get to the individual. The problem right now is that the individual can't opt out. I don't want to pay Social Security or something like that. The state says, yeah, you must pay. And if you don't, we may come and get you. And that to me is a problem. And this is why on that large scale. So we trying to come up with this little instance where Joe Blow can't get on a road or something like that because McRoad Builders decided that he couldn't be on that. We're talking about that. That's generally a small scale when you can consider the democide, the regulations that have destroyed people's lives and directly killed them, that the state is the only institution that could possibly do that. If it's one thing, I guess, that they are efficient at, it's being inefficient and killing people. So this sole system that people ask is, well, this is the most preferable, has gotten your assets of unborn people sold off, deficit spending, mountains upon mountains of debt, all of this stuff that's going to have to pop at this bubble that's building and growing, and it's going to have to pop at some time. People at each other's necks. Trump, he's the next Hitler. Trump, he's the savior of the world, and people sit here and link up and they're beefing, and they're so scared that the opposition may have control of the power for whatever reason. You think that is preferable, because certainly when that power, which I would agree, is in the wrong hands, bad things can be done to people. We see it done now, and we've certainly seen it over the course of human history. My argument is that I want these institutions that you think has to be left up to the state, whether it be with law, education, and all these sorts of things, are more so best left to the market. That's all that I'm saying. And going back to my first point and tying this, because you may have kind of moved away from, well, you're talking about culturally. What I was talking about early on is that how when I discuss things and I may get louder or something like that, or show indicate some power, you mistake that as anger. He's losing his mind. even though I'm staying on subject, and never mind that, because you're completely unfamiliar with people that act like that. Now take that and extend that to these other concepts. Why on earth are you expecting me or anybody else to come up with something that's in a pretty little bow so little Jimmy can somehow understand that this could be done in a privatized way, or in a more freer market, or in a more decentralized geographical area? That's why I said that it's based on something that is completely nonsensical. But that right there, that one instance where you're like, whoa, this guy right here, man, I'm not talking about you guys that follow my page. You guys already know we do that. We have weekly, at one point, just having debates and stuff like that. I'm rough around the edge. This is what I do, right? Especially if there's no moderator, this is what I do. I'm going to get my point out of that. Will not be interrupted. Definitely, if I'm trying to stick to the goalpost. And I understand that men doing that is something that may freak you out. Like, oh, it makes you awkward. It makes you uneasy. Trust me, for those of you that know me, I already know where I'm going with this. If I was mad, you know that. But that's a prime example of the issue here. In that you don't understand something that simple, like how could someone act in the way that they act? Now, why on earth would you think, with you not even understanding where I'm coming from, or the gentlemen that were at this table, we're coming from, and how we discuss this topic, for you to not be able to understand that? What makes you think that we should be required to come up with pretty tied up in a bow little answers and solution for every single instance or every single hypothetical situation that may be thrown out there? You don't even possess the capacity to understand human interactions is may be different from culture to culture and person to person. That's why I say it's a cultural thing. But that's all I wanted to say. You don't understand that. And it's okay for you to not understand that. And this is why I always say as well, ignorance crosses over into stupidity when a man is knowingly ignorant on something, but yet has such a loud and aggressive opinion and is firm on that. I can come up with theories how exactly roads could be done in a privatized society. I've done videos on this, but I always make sure that I make that little side note that I could be this is a theory. It can go in a completely different direction and still exist. That's how the market works, guys. You accept it for clothing, you accept it for food. Why not accept it for maybe other things? That's all that I'm saying. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day.